Welcome in. I'm Jim Kinzolka. I'm joined today by co-host Andrew Trebbing.
Hello.
We are fantasy football fanatics. We started playing Dynasty probably about 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And I know that our first couple years, there was a lot of learning that had to go on. And we've kind of gotten to the point now where we have a couple different leagues. We're helping educate some other players in the league, but we love the competition.
Yeah.
We have a decent gaming background, which we like to discuss game theory strategy and apply it to fantasy football because we're super nerds like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And we wanted to share some of the concepts and ideas we were talking about so that anybody who's starting out or is new to fantasy football, Dynasty
has a guide.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of has building blocks for where you can start from. If you're used to redraft leagues or if it's kind of a new experience, it's different in valuing the players and kind of it's a full year long, process, and it's fantasy football all year long. You get to stay excited for it all year. So
that's the best part of it.
Yeah.
I think that's going into Dynasty. I didn't expect that to come out of it,
Right.
But to be able to enjoy the NFL draft, the combine, free agency in the off season.
Yeah. The fact that we're doing this podcast in May kind of speaks, and we've been going crazy over fantasy football for the past couple of weeks, being like, oh my god,
So
it kind of just speaks volumes to how awesome Dynasty is.
Yeah. We're gonna start with how you assess whether you're in win now mode, rebuild mode, whether you're a middling team, what you should do.
Okay.
Usually, win now is the hardest thing to consistently do. If you're playing in a crappy league, yes, that will happen. But when you're playing with good players, you're not going to constantly be in win now mode. So you have to know when you are in win now mode, when you need to take advantage of it. How do you do it?
And if your team's good enough to actually be in win now mode. Yeah.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of people that go in, and I'm totally a sucker for this. As you look at your team, you're like, hey, my team's pretty good. Yeah, I think I could do this. And you're trading away your picks. You're doing this. You're doing that. And then it comes to the end of the season, you didn't even make the playoffs. And it's like, well, how do you so far off on your assessment of your team?
Yeah.
So, it's important to understand where you're at. If you're young, if your guys are starting to age, it's kind of figuring out, okay, is it worth it? Do I want to trade away all these future picks that I have for this talent that will show up right now? So, I mean, some of the assessments that I do personally at the beginning of the season is I look at like redraft rankings, because the redraft rankings are definitely different than Dynasty. They have some similarities, guys like Saquon Barkley and, DeAndre Hopkins. Like, those are all guys that are going to be at the top of the list in both, because they're just super talented and they're still reasonably young. But, guys like Antonio Brown, like he might be at the top in a redraft, but he's not necessarily the highest in Dynasty. So sometimes when I'm looking at my team and I look at how they're ranked in the redraft versus the Dynasty, if I have a lot of high redraft ranking guys and I look at my team and I say, if this was a redraft league, like, I'm sitting pretty. I'm pretty happy with. That's when I'm thinking about going into win now.
I think that's a great point. I think that's a huge point. If you don't have a lot of studs on your team, I think it's hard to even be in win now mode.
Yeah.
But when you have one or two, when you have one, I'm usually looking to trade away the one stud to rebuild. But once you start getting to a second stud, the opportunity to build a win now team does exist, but it's hard. 3 studs, you're definitely in. You're definitely in.
Yeah, and the thing about Dynasty is that usually the rosters are pretty big. All the leagues that we've been in have had big roster sizes. So you're taking all these shots on guys, and you can have those 3 studs and still just follow through and be like, you know what, I got these 4 receivers. If one of them hits and I can start them, like, I'm going to be sitting pretty. So, yeah, studs are kind of the super important part of Dynasty is you want to be – and that's why people kind of value these studs so highly is they're saying Hopkins is worth 3 firsts, 4 first-round draft picks and, for the rookie drafts. And, it's because they have that tier above. It's, that's the difference between winning and losing is having those guys that can outscore your other, there was other receivers by 5 points, 6 points consistently.
This is why in win now mode, I think you need to throw everything you have excess beyond your starting lineup. You might have to sacrifice some depth.
And you'll probably have to overpay.
And you got to overpay.
Yeah.
That's what leverage is.
Right.
It's like you can't forget that leverage exists in trades.
Yep.
And a lot of the times why people are... We'll get into trades a little bit later.
Sure. Yeah.
But trades getting done when you're in win now mode, you need to be willing to pay.
And they're going to hold your ransom, and you just have to pay it if you really want to win.
I mean, you should. I mean, you're going to get money that year.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah. One example was we were in a fantasy league where, I was competing towards the end, and I was like, listen, like, Jim, if I can get these couple of guys, it's going to put me over the top. And it was, all my firsts and all my seconds and all my thirds. And I got, Des Bryant and Julian Edelman and a couple other like pieces that
3 or 4 years. This was like 4 years ago.
Yeah, this was about this was
3 years ago. Maybe
3 years ago. Yeah, I think. And it, like obviously you look at them now and you're like, Des Bryant's not even in the league anymore. Julian Edelman is in his last year. He'll be okay this year.
But you won the money.
But I won the money then, exactly, and that even paid for future years where it's like, okay, I'm in the tank, but
you do it. You
I got my money. Yeah, exactly.
So win now is. That's the easy mode, right?
Yeah.
How do we get to easy mode? You got to rebuild.
Right.
You have to be willing to let go of a stud piece when you don't have a strong enough team. You have to get that king's ransom.
Right.
But if you're not committing to rebuild mode, you're going to flounder for years and years. You're not going to fully compete. You're not fully going to rebuild. You're going to hurt your team more than anything. So how do we choose to start rebuilding?
Yeah, and that's one of the really tough things to decide is when you're looking at your team and you're like, I think they're still good. They might be all right. I got this guy, I got that guy, but you're looking at their ages and you're like, okay, well this running back's 27 and this receiver's 29, and you're like, Randall Cobb's not what he used to be. There's always certain guys that you can just kind of feel in their cliffs. Demaryius Thomas, these guys that are like Demaryius Thomas was consistently a top 10 receiver every year up until last year, basically, and he hit that age, he hit that spot, and you're like, he's been injured a lot, So it's about looking at your players and assessing the core of your team and deciding, like, you know what, if I wait another year on this team, I'm probably not going to win, and I'm probably going to lose value on these players. So guys like Demaryius Thomas were guys that you should trade off last year, there's always guys that are at their peak value, and you can kind of see that the other side of the road, and it's hard to assess that age or that that time, but a lot of times it's when they're coming into contract years, or I think personally trading a guy on his contract year, because everybody's looking for that guy that's like, he's going to play hard, he's going to dig hard.
Super opportunity.
Yeah, it's this huge opportunity. He ends up signing for a different team, gets his money, and his numbers go down. I mean, it's been statistically proven that players that end up moving to different teams don't perform the same way that they did before. Like Sammy Watkins to Kansas City. You're like, oh, this is the perfect opportunity. He's in Kansas City. He was in Los Angeles, like the two best offenses in the league. And you're like,
still show me Sammy.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, and he built himself up in Buffalo, and he was getting those targets. But then he moved to these new teams. It's new systems, new coaches, and he's trying to make his way and fitting in. Whereas, guys that have been in the system, that's why like guys like Antonio Brown, when they were in Pittsburgh, were so awesome, because he's been in the system for forever, that he can make it work. But now that he's moving away to Oakland, is he going to be the same player? I don't know. It's hard to say.
And he's the prime example of rebuild mode trade piece, because you still get value out of him for somebody to overpay what he's going to produce. But if it's another year or two, nobody's going to want to pay that price.
Todd Gurley's the other one.
Yes.
That he's still reasonably young, but he's got the injuries. He's at that value where you're like, is he going to go up next year? No. Antonio Brown's value is not going to go up next year in Dynasty. He's ranked in the top 25 or something, 25th overall, whatever. There's no way we go into this season in May next year and say, oh, Antonio Brown, he's ranked the 20th best player in Dynasty. It's just not going to happen.
I think there's two huge points with addressing being in rebuild mode before you actually start doing it.
Right.
One of them is the value of your draft picks rises so significantly that you can have a top 3 pick in the next year's draft, if you're committing to rebuild mode ahead of time and you know where that pick's going to fall,
Right.
that's going to grab you an elite player most of the time.
Yeah.
Not guaranteed. It's still a probability play, but this is kind of, you got to play the probabilities.
And it's a tough spot to be in too, because you want to draft. Yeah, I mean, you want to win. You're in fantasy football. You want to win as much as you can. But finding that space where you can say, okay, well, I can trade away some of the players on my team. Maybe I'll be able to compete with some of these young guys. Who knows? If this guy hits, they'll fit. But at some point, you're not going to win every year unless the rest of the players in your team in your league are terrible. Like there's gonna be years that you're down. So you have to be able to assess it, kind of go from there. And rebuilds. It's not like in the NBA or, where they're rebuilding for 3 or 4 years. Like, Dynasty turns around pretty quickly. I mean,
very quickly. The NFL turns around super quick.
Yeah.
And this is the part, more emphasis on why you need to decide to be in rebuild mode quicker than you might think. Last year, if I had told you, hey, Doug Baldwin's this is his last season.
Yeah.
You'd be like, oh, that's stupid. The guy's like the number one receiver there. He's like, 30 years old, something like that roughly.
Yeah.
But he just retired this past week. And now you're like, I have no idea. Wow. Should I have Tyler Lockett? Should it be DK Metcalf? Should it be David Moore?
Yeah.
There's different options, but this is a constant change in the NFL every year. And you need to be able to churn your roster through when you're deciding to rebuild. Yeah,
and if you look at Doug Baldwin's stats were always good, but then you looked at his age. I think he turned 30 this year. I think that's the cliff that he was about to fall off. And obviously, it's sad the injuries that he went through, but you have to be able and willing to trade that guy away before his value really goes down.
Yeah,
and you'll find trade partners for players like Doug Baldwin because people see his stats and they say, okay, well, I'll pick him up. And then, 2 years down the line, where is he at? And you have that first round DK Metcalf pick or that N'Keal Harry pick that you got. And 2 years from now, those guys have the potential to be top 15, top 10 receivers.
So middling mode is the last of these three, and it's the worst one to be in.
Yeah.
Because in middling mode, your draft picks can go from a top 3 pick to a bottom 4 pick. You can win money in that year, or you can wreck your team trying to overpay for assets to compete and win money that year and fail. Usually for me, if I'm ever approaching a middling mode team, I'm just committing to rebuild. Because if you're going to win money now, you should be confident and be like, my team's freaking good.
But yeah, that's the issue with being a middling team is, are you going to be able to beat these super teams in dynasties? Because there are going to be teams that are going to be loaded. There are going to be players that have, accrued picks early and their guys are materializing. They got lucky on a couple picks. They hit on this guy, they hit on that guy, they got a good trade. And you look at their team and you're just like, how am I ever supposed to beat a team like this?
Well, you probably aren't for that year or two.
Right.
But 3 or 4 years down the road, that person's going to sit on those assets because they're thinking, hey, I'm going to win with this team for 4 or 5 years. This is awesome.
Yep.
But it changes so much with the NFL.
Yeah.
3 years, like that team's probably not going to be winning unless they make moves. How do you make moves? Trades. Yeah. Trades are everything. This is another huge reason why we play Dynasty is because we love trading.
Yes. and the best part about Dynasty is that you're not just trading players for players. Is in some leagues you can trade for, fab budget, budget in your that you can use for free agents, or you can trade for future draft picks. And, different leagues are different on how far ahead you can draft. Generally, it's, you can take picks 2 to 3 years ahead of time. Most of the time people are trading with next year's picks because that's the closest and most exciting thing that's going on.
I know my first 2 years when I started playing Dynasty, I was scared to trade because I didn't want to give away inappropriate value. I had no idea. I kind of was just entering to play. But after those couple of years, you finally got an idea of the value. If you're new to Dynasty and you're not sure on the values, I highly recommend not trading. You're going to learn eventually over time how much time and effort you put in, whether you're casual or you're just hanging out with friends playing, or if you want to be super competitive and you want to win a ton of money all the time.
Yeah.
You need to put in some effort, but if you're not aware of the values, it's going to be hard to make trades.
Yeah. And I think that's a great idea to say, to hold on, especially to hold on to your rookie draft picks for the first couple of years, because you make those picks and you look back 2 or 3 years down the line, you're like, oh, I got him in the first round. He's now ranked the 40th overall Dynasty guy. Oh, I got this guy in the third round. He's now the 80th, 150th ranked, overall rated guy. So you can kind of get an idea of, and obviously there's gonna be hits and there's gonna be misses. I mean,
Yep.
I hate to bring up bad memories, but I mean, there was the season where Marquise Lee got picked ahead of Odell Beckham Jr. At the time, it made sense, and then looking back now, it's like, wow, Odell is probably the highest receiver in Dynasty, and Marquise Lee is a guy that's top 50 probably, but it just not the same. Not the same.
Yeah.
So, and they were going into the draft were very similarly ranked in the Dynasty rankings. And that's kind of just the way it goes. You take your best shot on these guys, you do your due diligence, but they're not all going to be hits.
Definitely have low expectations for your first year or two. It's a learning experience. Like anything in life, you have to be willing to put in the time and not expect to be on the top from the get-go. The other aspect that I want to look at is there seems to be trade windows in the season.
Right.
And in the offseason, I mean, there's off-season ones.
Right. I have 2 spots where I want to be, selling my picks. If I'm not looking to make picks, I'm looking to sell my picks. I'm looking to get players now. I guess selling players to get picks too. Mm-hmm. I want to trade my picks away when the draft is just about to happen.
It's the highest value for them.
Everyone's excited about it. Yeah, that's the time that everybody wants to get their picks because they see these guys. The talking heads are saying this guy, and you're like, oh, he's great. Oh, he's there. I go trade. And you end up giving away next year's picks. I always find it hard and a lot of people do this is they'll say, okay, I'll give you my third round. You give me your second round next year. I always want to be the guy getting that second round next year. Because the third round guys, you think you're like, oh, this is the guy, this is the steal, and then you go back and you look at your draft a year later and you're like, oh, he didn't do anything, and now you have my second round pick.
And it also is a great opportunity for the new player to trade away their picks for players because you're going to get known value of players that have already produced rather than these are coins we're flipping here on rookies.
Yep.
Yeah. Even though we may have some more knowledge off of research and stuff, but it's very minor.
But and even then you just don't know. Sometimes the guy that gets drafted 5 rounds later ends up being the stud.
Exactly.
It's impossible to say. On the flip side, the other one personally that I found, especially last year, was trading for next year's picks. I like trying to get those picks right before the season starts because everybody's excited about their team. They're looking, and I pulled off some pretty awesome trades, just last year when I was kind of turning into a rebuild mode. I was giving away some of my players that were at their peak value, guys like Jordan Howard, Lamar Miller, guys that were at their highest value in my mind, where they weren't gonna go any higher than that, and getting those picks next year to teams that are like, if I could just get this piece, I could do this guy could do that, and they're willing to trade those picks because it's so far away. It seems like it's years and years away, but then when the time comes, you're like, I got all these first round picks, I got all these second round picks, I gave away, not that much. So
the assets are from a distance are valued less. But at the beginning of the season, once the season's about to start, everybody who's in middling mode is looking at their team going, you know what? I got a pretty good team.
Yeah.
Everybody,
if I could get this.
Everybody has the ceiling of potential and they think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But you look back and you go, I need one more guy.
Yeah.
I need one more guy. Let me overload and pay for this thing. And if you're entering rebuild mode, perfect opportunity to benefit. They're going to overpay. They're going to think, I got to pay for it now and I'm going to win. But if you don't get it there is one other opportunity, and that is 2 weeks or earlier before the trade deadline. There is another weird window that I like, and this is the one that I usually try to exploit a little bit more, is you find middling teams that are, week 9 in the NFL, and you're like, okay, cool, I'm 4 weeks away from the playoffs. I'm close. I'm threatening. You're either just in or you're just out on the playoffs.
Yeah.
Okay. Your first round pick next year is in limbo. It's going between the 4th overall pick and the 10th.
Yeah, 10th or 12th.
Anywhere in that range. And you go, hey, oh man, if I can trade to get that pick off of them, they might think they're winning this year.
Yeah.
Let me get that pick off of them. I'll trade up a piece. I'm not going to give them my best thing, but let me take a shot on this first somehow.
And if it does end up being that fourth overall pick, then you're
huge.
Yeah.
So like there's a prime opportunity to target middling teams that might believe they're better than they are or they're win now when they're not.
The one last thing about trading in general, and especially in Dynasty, and this is something that is kind of just a general fantasy thing, is that teams are going to always overvalue their own players.
Always.
It's very difficult to trade in Dynasty leagues and fantasy leagues because, I look at my team and say, oh, my team's amazing. I got this guy. And then, you come at me with, oh, I got this guy who's amazing. And I'm like, why would I? And they could be ranked right next to each other in the rankings. It could just be exactly the same. And, but my guy's better because he's on my team.
Yeah, or so, I think he's going to be so much better over the next 2 years.
Yeah. Oh, you just see he's going to get this, and it's every player is not every player is the same, but every player is in the same sort of situation. So you have to try and work through that. And there's going to be people that you try and trade with in your league that you're going to come back and just be like, I'm just not going to trade with them. Like.
And it'll change over time. You'll get frustrated with certain things. It's only because communication broke down and there's a misperception on values of a player.
Right.
You're both in two different ballparks. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
Just keep trying to trade.
Yeah.
Keep working through the trades.
Yeah.
There is one more window that I like to talk about. The last window that I like it's a very small window. It's only open for a quick time frame. But usually on our rosters, we're starting to lose faith on certain players that just haven't panned out, and they're in year 2 on your roster, on your depth. But I want to get rid of them, and I want to trade them for something before I'm going to drop them. So you may have 1 week or 2 weeks in the season when they spike and have a good fantasy performance. And other people are going to look at it as potentially a buy low opportunity before they're going to break out more. And just keep in mind, guys on your roster, that I'm not saying you have to love or hate every player on your roster, but there's guys you're going to lose faith on. Have a plan to get value out of them off of your bench. And that's where, when there's this brief spike, cash out, put it out there. Don't get greedy. Just accept what anybody's going to offer.
And usually those types of players are usually those mid-range receivers where somebody sees, a guy like Keelan Cole. He has a couple good weeks, and you're like, oh, he's going to be the number 1 in Jacksonville. He's going to be this great guy. And that's when you sell him, and then, maybe he will, maybe he won't. But, you can kind of get an idea of like, this may just be kind of,
It could be, but it's still in the gray area. Look at Jacksonville.
Yeah.
I mean, they still have Dede and him.
Yeah.
Jacksonville, obviously Marquise Lee, but that looks to be their main receiving core. They didn't go and add anybody really.
Right.
So
and those guys are guys you probably want to sell right now, because if people have that perception of, oh, they could be this, they could be that, realistically, like they're not going to be top wide receiver 2s. Like I maybe one of them will, but you just don't know which one it's going to be. Yeah. It's kind of like the situation in Los Angeles last year where they had those 3 guys, and you're like, I don't know which one's going to be the top, and somehow they all ended up being like, wide receiver 1s, which is kind of crazy. But I think like going into this year, like I don't think that's going to replicate. I don't think they're not all going to be top 24 or top 20 guys.
I'm curious what will occur, but it's another huge thing. When you look back on the NFL season every year, you go, there's like 50 storylines that we didn't even think were going to occur. So expect the unexpected when it comes to the NFL. You need to think about the future situations that you're not going to project occurring and get pieces where those opportunities are going to happen.
And you can't beat yourself up over missing out, because the problem is people maybe miss on a trade, or they trade away a piece that does end up hitting. You have to realize that you're not going to be 100% on your trades. You're not going to win every trade that you're in. You just want to win over 50%. That's how your team improves.
Most people are just 50% on their trades. And if you can get a little bit more, you're going to gain an edge.
You're always going to, there's always going to be trades that you look back on and you're like, oh, what was I thinking? How could I make this trade? And you have to be able to get past that stigma and just kind of keep pushing yourself, keep following your rankings, following, what you believe. I don't like trade calculators, but you can kind of good idea, ask some friends, ask some people in the forums what you think.
Get a starting idea.
Exactly, so that you're not, getting yourself ripped off, but you just got to pull the trigger and take those shots.
Take shots.
Yeah.
Draft pick valuation. This is awesome. You talk
Huge
about
learning curve.
You talk. Oh yeah. I mean, this takes years.
Yeah.
Years. I mean, I just feel like I'm starting to get a grasp now. 6-7 years down the road.
And it's
you have dynasty value trade charts around where people have different values and everything, and then they associate a value with the draft pick. There's a huge opportunity in certain seasons and not as much in others, because one year you'll have Saquon Barkley where you're like, obviously I just got a gun and go get this guy. And you'll have another year where you're like, oh, it's TJ Yeldon and Sammy Watkins.
Right.
And I mean, this is in hindsight a little bit.
Right.
But you have to understand that some years that first overall pick is worth 2 to 3 first rounders more than in another year, and there might not be as much depth. So
and Saquon is the perfect example. I mean, he went second overall to the Giants, and everyone going into the season was saying, this guy, he's a freak. Like, he's way better than everyone else. And I mean, it's only been one season, but I mean, if you compare Saquon to the guys behind him, were Rashad Penny, Sony Michel, Chubb ended up being decent, but like pretty much everyone, and they were all running backs. They're like not even close to his level. You wouldn't trade all 4 of those guys for Saquon. Saquon is like,
you'd hold on to him. He's a key piece. He's a stud for the future. I find that our biggest payoff in draft picks is when somebody misvalues their draft picks.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, perfect example was the first year we did Dynasty. I didn't really understand what rookie rankings were. To me, it was like, oh, well, I'm so used to redrafts where, the rookies are never highly ranked. It's like some of them might pan out, but they usually don't get opportunities. And I traded you in a one quarterback league. I traded for who was
Phillip
Rivers. I traded my first and second draft picks. I was in the playoffs, so they were late draft picks, but it was still a first and a second round for like a mid-range quarterback in a one quarterback league.
We had no idea at the time, but we decided, hey, gonna do this, make a trade, let's see what happens. We're gonna learn from it.
It made sense for me at the time. I thought it did, at least.
I wasted the picks too.
That was Marquise Lee.
Marquise Lee.
Could have been Odell. But yeah, no, I mean, it's hard to understand. And like I said, there's the Marquise Lee versus Odell Beckham. But then when you do hit on the guys and you look back on the rankings, and you're like, well, Melvin Gordon was in the first round. All these top guys that 2 years, 3 years down the line, you're like, these are the best players I could have on my team.
Yeah, definitely. So firsts are huge. Yeah. Everybody knows this. If you're going to have a late first, the value on it year to year is, I view them poorly. I don't like late firsts. You can usually cash out if you're in a win now team to try and get that last stopgap piece that you need to win.
Right.
But other than that, don't trade your firsts unless you definitively know you're going to win now mode.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're probably misvaluing what you have there.
Yeah.
Seconds, you're still going to hit on guys, but second rounders are usually, it's usually pretty deep in the second round where you're going to find value in rookie drafts. But there's usually a giant cliff that happens towards the tail end of that second. Right. Sometimes it's the middle. It depends on the year. Other rare years, you're going to get something. It passes into the third, and you're like, "Wow, this is a good year to draft and accumulate late seconds, early thirds."
And yeah, I mean, one of the best metrics for rating guys from the draft is if they're drafted in the first 3 rounds. I mean, there's a big difference between a guy drafted as far as like hitting in the top 24, top 30 players or whatever. Guys that were drafted in the first 3 rounds of the actual NFL draft usually pan out like a high percentage more than all the other ones. So, and generally, depending on the year, there's usually about 20 to 25 of the skill positions, running back, receiver, tight end, that are drafted in those first 3 rounds. So that kind of gives you a gauge of like, okay, once I'm getting into the the later end of the second, early third round of your dynasty draft for rookies, you're going to start looking at guys that are drafted after those first 3 rounds. So that's like a big cliff right there.
Yeah, in especially if you're not researching rookies or in let's all be real. We take a look at a highlight film for a couple minutes if we really like a guy and be like, you know what, this is my approval. Nice little lazy eye test. But in reality, if you do some research, you're gonna gain a little bit of an edge, and that will transfer into your third round picks paying off. And you might find some stuff falling into the fourth because other people, if you're not paying attention, guess what? You only really care about your first round and second round picks.
Yeah. And you just look at the rankings list. You're like, sure, that guy. He's on this team. Why not? You know? So that's when you're going to beat out those teams that aren't putting in the effort. You put in the couple extra hours of work. You put in, you know, you listen to the podcast. You listen to this. You listen to that. You kind of dig a little bit deeper, and you could say, oh, well, I like this guy over this guy because this, and this.
And you start to formulate your own opinions because there's a lot of regurgitation of what we hear from, you know, mainstream regular entertainment consumption for NFL. And then you start getting into the people who are talking about fantasy, which is great to listen to. This is no knock towards them. But a lot of times you hear the same stuff being repeated over and over. And you start going, let me critically think for myself. I might be able to find something here. And soon you'll find out that, hey, I've got a certain strength in evaluating receivers. Maybe I stink at running backs and quarterbacks and every other position. Maybe you like safeties. But you got to look to where your strengths are, and you'd be like, cool, I have some strengths here. Let me start critically thinking more where my strengths are. Yeah. And I'll look for help in the weaknesses.
Exactly. And you formulate opinions and ideas, and you share them with other people that, you know, that you're in a community with or that you talk with. You say, oh, you know, I saw this and I think this. And they can bounce it off, say, you're an idiot. That's so stupid. or wow, that's interesting. I didn't even think about that. You know, and there's hundreds and hundreds of like weird things like, oh, you know, they get drafted when they're 21, they're more likely to hit than when they're 23. Or, you know, if they were this dominant in college, they're 15% more likely to do that, you know.
Speaking of age is huge. I know with one of the small things that I look at is if a guy's coming in and he's 20 or 21, I put more value on it, not just because of the slight bit on the age. It's more of a factor that if this guy doesn't pan out in 2.5 to 3 years, usually 2, but up to 3, you still have a guy who's about 24 who somebody might be willing to buy.
Right.
But if that guy's 22, 23 initially, 23, and 3 years goes by and he's 26, a lot of people are not going to want to play that math.
And that's one of the interesting things, especially about Dynasty, is that like people are so obsessed with age. You know, you're like, oh, this guy's 25. You're like, this guy's 24. Oh, interesting. You know, you want to, in Dynasty, everybody wants to get those young guys. And sometimes, depending on the league, you want to maybe do the opposite of what everyone else is doing. Because you say, okay, everyone's fighting over these young guys. They're just throwing away these guys that are 28, 29. I'll pick them up for peanuts, and I'll start them, and I'll win championships, you know?
Yeah.
So you kind of want to, you know, this is like a trick from playing card games and just being a gamer in general, is that if the and this is a poker thing too, is if the table's doing everybody's doing the one thing, you want to be the one that's doing the opposite, because you're going to gain that value. Yeah. If everybody's trying to trade for draft picks, that's when you want to be trading away your draft picks, because everybody's going to be fighting over them. If everybody's trying to, you know, trade for young players, you know, okay, I'll trade you my young player for your 3 awesome guys that are 27, 28. And then you start them for a couple years and you win your championships. So you would get your money in. So, yeah, that's one of the key things, especially that in fantasy I find is important, is to just kind of flip-flop and do the opposite.
I think it's huge. I think it's huge. Yeah. And, you know, opportunity when it comes to a player, say he lands on a team. This doesn't have to be just rookies. This can be any player. They get traded, picked up in free agency. When they land in a good landing spot, everybody loves and wants this player.
Yeah.
Guess what? Be ready to get rid of these guys.
Yeah.
The moment something pops in the news, because people are going to say, oh, I heard this. I must get this guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got to take advantage of opportunities on players, and you need to be able to take advantage of opportunities on their landing spots.
Right. So like this year, the perfect example of what you're talking about was like, for me at least, is Mecole Hardman. Like,
huge opportunity.
he has a huge opportunity in Kansas City. He's this, this young player, and his value is like sky. I mean, he's going like 4th or 5th overall in rookie drafts, which is crazy because he wasn't even on my board at all.
But
like,
it makes sense
pre-draft
with the public sentiment.
With Tyreek Hill, yeah.
I was telling you briefly before, there's one thing that I noticed from play draft ADP shifts.
Yeah.
He moved up a full 9 rounds. The week before the NFL draft, recorded the data, and then to this point yesterday, he moved up 9 whole rounds. That's 108 spots.
Yeah. So for me, this is when you sell him.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Like
I agree.
I don't want him on my. I mean, I want him on my team so that I can trade him away, but I don't want him on my team because there's no guarantee he's actually going to produce. You know?
But the public sentiment is so high on him, and this is partially because of Tyreek.
Yep.
This is partially because of Tyreek.
But even without Tyreek, there's still, Sammy Watkins is there. I think I guess Chris Conley's not on the team anymore. But there's always a bevy of other receivers that are going to be either right around Mecole Hardman's value or even higher. Guys that have been on the team for 2 or 3 years, to me, are probably going to get that shot over Mecole Hardman to start.
Oh yeah.
If he shows up, obviously, and he's insane, he'll get his chance, but.
He's a rookie receiver.
Yeah.
Rookie receivers take time.
Yes.
Don't expect production immediately. Even though the opportunity is there, if you're a running back and opportunity hits, guess what? I like that better for rookies, but not on receivers. Unless you're a freak.
And that's, exactly. And, that's one of the reasons that I like buying those. I like looking back in the drafts, from 2 years ago or a year ago and look at those receivers that were like, he hasn't really panned out yet. Like, I want to be trading for those guys. I want to be trading away my 3rd round rookie draft pick for a guy that was a 1st round pick a year or 2 ago that's still on a team, still has a chance.
I like it.
I think there's just value to be gained there. And one of the guys, and it's for tight ends as well, those that crew of, OJ Howard and David Njoku, Evan Ingram, this is the year that I think that they're going to really shoot up in value because it's been 2 years now. This is their 3rd year. This is when tight ends generally start to peak. So the guys that, invested a 1st round pick, 2 years ago, and these guys are like, well,
got to pay off this year.
Why hasn't Njoku? What's going on? And then this is when you're like, okay, send him my way.
It's Njoku's year. Don't worry.
Yeah.
So another thing to look at when we're evaluating players is their injury history.
Yes.
This is something that in the first 4 or 5 years of doing Dynasty, I did not put enough emphasis on or pay as much attention to. Over the past year, I think it's helped make better assessments of, this guy's got a second lower body injury. I'm not talking about sprains. I'm talking about serious injuries.
Yeah.
Those are guys you need to think about really moving on from.
Yeah.
Even after the first one, depending on what the injury is, you might want to consider it relative to how old they are.
Right. And it's so tough because you see these guys and you saw the way they were in their primes, and we're talking
Todd Gurley,
Des Bryant, guys that you're like, oh, they're so good, but they were injured a lot when they were younger. But when they played, they were so great. Sammy Watkins is another perfect example is where these, he was a superstar when he played, and Des was insane when he was playing. But can you take those shots on those guys anymore? And you see their value, and you're like, oh, but look how low value they are. Like I could get a guy for peanuts
if they just perform at 3/4 of what they were.
Yeah, but the problem is, especially with the lower body injuries and the serious injuries, is that you look at the guys that do come back from these ones. Like Adrian Peterson's like the prime example of a guy that had a huge injury and came back the next year like insane. But that's such an outlier. These guys usually don't come back and perform. They have these awful injuries. They come back at 40%, 50%. And then in fantasy, if you're not in that top bracket, you're just sitting in the middle with everybody else and you have no value.
It's very rare when the injuries occur and how much it's going to hit them. But where it hits them for me is in certain metrics. Usually I like to use 3-cone drill and 40 time, like most people probably do. And there's some other ones, but primarily those. And when you have a lower body injury, guess what? Those times that they started to have as a rookie or just coming in the NFL, you got to shave some of that time.
Right.
Or not shave, but you need to add some more time to that.
Right.
So, the guy who had a 6.95 3-cone, you're like, awesome, he's sub 7. This means certain probability play that's going to work out. If he has a lower body injury, guess what?
He's not running at a 7 anymore.
Yeah. It all changes everything. And so you need to put more emphasis on these injuries and how much your guy's value is going to decrease. Injuries are opportunities to trade away a player.
Right.
Another issue when evaluating players is off-field issues.
Yes.
This is a prime example of Tyreek Hill, which we all love talking about still.
He's and we still don't even know what's going to happen with him.
You have no idea. The opportunity there's opportunity if he's only suspended 8 games or even just this year. This is why Dynasty, it's fine to take the risk on Tyreek Hill because odds are that if there's nothing this year, he'll still play later on.
Right. And his price right now is super low. I mean, we're looking at trading away for a 3rd round, 4th round rookie draft pick. He's fallen that far in a lot of leagues.
He's the right age to go for it.
Yeah.
If he was 28, 29 years old, no, I wouldn't take the shot on it. But off-field issues normally lead to guys not producing down the road. There's a reason why people don't mess with it.
Right. Yeah. It's tough because, and it's an ever-evolving thing because the NFL is changing their policies as well. Some of these guys are getting shunned. And Tyreek Hill is such a unique situation because, Adrian Peterson had this thing with his son a couple years ago, and he ended up getting suspended for the year. And, he ended up working it out. It's not as extreme as this situation. We haven't seen a guy like this since, Ray Rice. I mean, Ray Rice, had that awful video come out, and he was shunned from the league. He never got re-signed. His career was over. Again. The other one is Josh Gordon, who's he went flying into this league. He was insane when he was on Cleveland, and he had these issues. And people are like, well, I'll still buy him for this much. He's still worth this much. And then he doesn't play, and then he comes back, and then he gets addicted again, and then he goes to the Patriots, and then plays for a little bit. He plays at a top level when he's on the Patriots, or maybe not top level, but pretty good.
And then the off-field
and then more
happens
off-field
again,
comes
and
back.
he's like, I'm done.
Yeah, and I have no interest in trading for a guy like Josh Gordon. He's probably never going to play again.
I usually avoid them. You're going to save yourself the headache and the problems, but sometimes you're going to find somebody like a Tyreek Hill, and he's going to win you a league one year.
Yeah.
Contract years. This is an interesting one. That, most athletes are trying their best all the time.
Right.
Most athletes.
Yes.
There comes to be this perception that, it's his last year before his contract's up. He's going to play better and he's going to do more,
right,
so that he can get a new contract
because he wants to get paid. That's the whole
so
sentiment.
If a guy's lazy, which there are a lot of lazy athletes. I know it sounds weird to say, but there's a lot of guys who are like, I don't have to do this, so I'm not going to. And then they're like, wait, the money's about to run out. Okay, these are the guys.
Yeah.
If you can assess this information on a player,
right,
those are the guys you pay attention to on contract years.
Right. Yeah, I mean the contract year thing it's so funny because statistically you look at it, some of these guys do pull out all the stops, and then the next year they kind of fall off. Yeah. But there's that one year where they're picking up that steam, and if you can go onto the websites and get an idea of when these guys are about to be on their contract years, if you can get them before, because inevitably every year right before the draft starts, there's that that article that says, here's the 10 top 10 guys that are on their contract years, and then everyone knows now. Oh, Randall Cobb's on his contract year. Oh, this guy's on. It's always there's always a list of guys, and you're like, oh, so everyone kind of knows. If you can get ahead by a half a year, get ahead by a couple months, trade for them before people start to realize that, then that's when you can gain the most value for these guys. To me, it's overhyped the contract year.
Yes.
I think that statistically sometimes they do perform more, but it's not consistent. I mean, they could get injured. They could just not be that good. They could not get the opportunity. It has to be a very specific set of circumstances for some of these guys to really pan out. And I think part of it too is that these teams, and Le'Veon Bell is like the perfect example of this when he was, going through his whole contract issues, was that the teams were feeding him the ball because they're like, you know what, we're going to get the use out of him before he costs us a bunch of money. He's only costing us, let's say, just $1 million this year. And if we have to renew him next year, and it'll be $10 million, let's just give him the carries now, and then we'll get some other rookie next year and we'll give them a bunch of opportunities. So
Yep.
some of these guys do kind of fall into great opportunity in their contract years to prove themselves.
There is something that can happen if you're not paying attention. The main thing that I see people making errors in are perception of a guy's real value. If you have had a guy on your roster for 2 years and you're not satisfied with him, your perception of his value is much less than it actually is at.
Right.
So these are going to be buy opportunities that people should reach out for. And at the same time, don't misvalue a player you have when you're going to sell him because you're just disappointed with him. Just because you're disappointed with him
Right.
doesn't mean he's worth a 4th round rookie pick.
Right.
He may be worth a 2nd round pick.
Yeah, that's a huge thing. You know, when you have guys on your team that maybe you got a guy and he got injured for the year, and then the next year he was kind of like, and you're just like, you know what, forget it. I just want to get I just want to get someone else.
Value.
Let me just get
value.
somebody for him, and then you're giving away, and then other teams are like, oh yeah, I see this guy's been on your team. I'll pick him up off your team for pennies, you know, and then the guy ends up hitting. And maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, but you don't want to undervalue your guys that you paid a premium for. You know, guys like, you know, Corey Davis is like the big one that, you know, in the rookie drafts he was
High.
I mean, he was top 3 usually, I think, that year. And, you know, a lot of Dynasty guys are really still pretty high on Corey Davis because they paid that premium on him. And, you know, maybe he will pan out, maybe he won't. But, like, there's also people that have him on their team that are like, you know what, forget him. Like, I don't want to deal with him. And if you can pick him up for cheap, if you can get him for like a late first this year or a 2nd round pick, I mean, God, you need to slam that and take him like as soon as you can.
And that window might open up. This is like the spike window opportunity of, hey, this guy flashed for 1 or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a built-in system where you're like, hey, I'm going to hold on to guys and not lose out on some value. Just allow an opportunity to open up for you. Don't just give up.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of a very specific and difficult thing to assess, you know, when you look at a guy, because usually guys overvalue their own players. But when a guy has been sitting on your bench for 2 or 3 years, you're like, what am I going to do with him? And then other people are looking and saying, like, I'd give a 2nd round pick for him. And you're like, all right, I'll give him away for a 4th. And they're like, ching. And you lose out on that value that you could have gotten. So,
Yes.
yeah, don't sell yourself short, kind of. And in those situations, you kind of just got to follow those guides and follow those, you know, the rankings and kind of getting an idea of like, oh, he really is worth this much. I thought he was worth way less than that, but he's actually better than you would think.
Something else to look at, and this pertains mainly to rookies, is the level of competition they play at in college. If somebody's playing D2, you don't really take it seriously of what their talent really is.
Yeah.
But if a team is Division I, but they're playing against a lot of top 25 teams, and you watch film of some of those big games, you might actually be blown away by a guy.
Right.
But if he's not playing against any of the top 25 teams in Division I, you seriously have to consider whether this guy is just being hyped up or he really is talented.
Yeah, and like, for example, and we don't know how he's going to end up being at this year's draft, but the best statistical receiver going into this draft was Andy Isabella from UMass.
Prime example.
And you look at his, you're like, wow, look at all those catches, look at all those yards. Yeah, he played for UMass and he's 5'9". Like, is he gonna pan out? He was the first guy picked for Arizona, but is he gonna be the best receiver in Arizona? Usually, I also do the same thing where I stick with the guys from the big colleges that played against the NFL type players. You know, yeah, like Andy Isabella can weave around and bob, and you're like, wow, look at all those tackles he's avoiding. You're like, yeah, that's because these guys are like D2 level players. They're not top tier. They're not guys that are going to be playing in the NFL.
This is where falling back on guys in the first 3 rounds, that'll tell you a lot of the scouting from the NFL, that they believe in the talents relative to the competition. Let that dictate a lot of your initial judgments.
Right.
Is anything else you wanted to add?
Have fun. Enjoy it. Yeah, I mean, Dynasty is just awesome.
Just have fun with it.
Yeah.
From all of us here at DFF, thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep building your foundation.